Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dana Lawson. I'm Chief of the Bureau of Recycling and Hazardous Waste Management. I want to welcome you all and thank you all very much for being here and participating in such important work. Next slide, please. There have already been several stakeholder meetings on Dirty Dirt, the Dirty Dirt Law and the rule itself, and today's agenda, while inextricably linked to the Dirty Dirt Law, is focused on modifications to the recycling rules, and that is due to the fact that the Dirty Dirt Law states that acceptable material transported to a Class B facility in New Jersey is exempt from the provisions of the Dirty Dirt Law. So today we will introduce certain concepts and talk about potential modifications to the recycling rules, including amending the definition of Class B recyclable materials, changes to an existing exemption, and perhaps adding a new exemption. We are also soliciting input on issues specific to impacts to markets, as well as QA, QC, and sampling and analytical procedures. Next slide, please. The importance of your engagement in this discussion cannot be overemphasized. The reasonableness and practicality of a potential rule or guidance document depends on your input and participation in this meeting. You all have the critical role to keep all of us informed with your experience, knowledge, and wisdom. So please bring your voices to the table. We need your active engagement in this undertaking and are very much looking forward to your insights during this meeting. Which leads me to the next slide, please. In plain language, any and all content discussed in this meeting is intended to facilitate discussion and is for informational purposes only. No final decision regarding this information is expressed or implied. That bears repeating again, no final decision regarding any of this information is expressed or implied. And so on that note, I'll turn the meeting over to Karen Clue.
Thank you, Dana. As Dana stated, I'm Karen Clue, and I am your facilitator for today's meeting. Let me just start out by saying we're scheduled for the meeting to extend until 4 o'clock, just to ensure that we had sufficient time. But we may not need all of that time, so we may end early. A couple of reminders on how to participate in this Teams platform. Please keep your mic muted and your camera turned off throughout the presentation. For this meeting, we will be using the chat function for two purposes. We ask that you use the function if you are in the department will attempt to resolve them with you. Also, the poll questions will be displayed in the chat function. I'll describe the poll questions in more detail shortly. So instead, please use the raise your hand function if you have a comment or question. After each presenter concludes their presentation, I'll call on those who have raised their hands. When selected to speak, please unmute your mic, turn on your camera, and introduce yourself. When done, please mute your mic, turn your camera off, and lower your hand. I do see that there are two people who have called in, so I don't have everybody's name, so I will just, if those two individuals would like to speak, I'll just introduce them by their phone number and they'll have to recognize themselves. In the interest of time, staff members may interject in the discussion with a cue to keep us on schedule, so we wrap up the discussion and move on to the next presentation. If we don't get to your question, there will be another opportunity to continue the discussion during the conclusion of the presentations. Next slide, please. More details about the poll questions. Throughout the presentation, we want to keep track of your opinions, so we will be asking you a series of questions designed to solicit feedback from you in order to inform our rulemaking. There are multiple choice questions, with most having an other option. So you can write in an answer if none of the multiple choices seem appropriate. These questions are not intended to be tricky, but if you are unsure of an answer, please just answer to the best of your ability or use the other option to write in an answer that is not one of the multiple choices. In the interest of time, you will have 1 minute to respond to the question, and a timer will appear in the corner. We will not be keeping the poll questions open beyond this meeting as we have done in the past, because we have seen that there are no additional responses recorded after the meeting. Also, by closing the poll questions, we have the ability to display a graph of the answers moments after the poll questions close. So we can see how the group responded. However, individual answers will not be visible. We will also display those who wrote in other options, but we may not be able to display every single other response due to limits on screen space. When we display the poll question results, we have set aside 5 minutes for follow-up discussion. Again, if we need more time, we can continue the discussion during the Q&A section of this meeting. How it works. A link will be provided in the chat that will direct you to each poll question as they are introduced. So you will need to keep your chat function open. And when a poll question is announced, simply click on the link in the chat, which will bring you to the question and answers. You can change your choice as many times as you like, but only your final choice will be recorded. Next slide, please. I just would like to introduce you to the rulemaking team for this effort. It includes Tom Farrell, who is the Chief of the Bureau of Solid Waste Compliance and Enforcement, myself, who's facilitating, Dana Lawson, who you already met, who is the Chief of Bureau of Recycling and Hazardous Waste Management, Dan Murray, who is an environmental engineer in the Bureau of Recycling and Hazardous Waste Management. We also have other support. We have Young Kim, who is our regulatory officer, who will be joining us a little bit later. Seth Hackman, who is the Chief of the Bureau of Solid Waste Planning and Licensing. Bob Gomez, who is the Chief of the Bureau of Hazardous Waste Compliance and Enforcement. Anthony Teal and Tyrone Jordan, who are supplying the critical IT components of this meeting.
Hey, there we go.
So as a reminder, please mute your mics and turn off your cameras. And I would like to turn the floor over to Tom Farrell.
Thanks, Karen. So why was the Dirty Dirt Law promulgated? Well, there's a number of events that I can tell you about, but I'm just going to share a couple with you. What you're looking at here is a sign of free topsoil at a service station where tanks were pulled, and some unsuspecting homeowner actually took up the offer and loaded up some of this free topsoil into their van and got just a few miles down the turnpike before they felt nauseous from the fumes and had to pull over. Next slide, please. So back in the mid-2000s, the Woodbridge Pool was being renovated. And they hired a landscaper who received a lot of fill from Class B facilities to upgrade the landscaping in the area. A lot of that was topsoil, looked beautiful. He had excess fill and had to dispose of it. The disposal and fill required analysis. The analysis showed high levels of PCBs. So all of that landscaping had to be undone, and the State Commission of Investigation got involved and tried to figure out what was the source of the PCB contamination. So that delayed the opening of the pool for several years. Next slide, please. Right after Hurricane Sandy, the dirt brokers were on the loose. They were looking for people who wanted free fill. There were a number of homeowners right along Raritan Bay that were experiencing erosion, some of them with their swing sets or patios about to collapse down a slope onto the beach. So this dirt broker went door to door, offered free fill, and proceeded to bring in construction and demolition debris-laden soils that later tested out to have the typical footprint of what we find in construction and demolition debris. This particular site went through the ARCS process, and an LSRP confirmed the analysis and required it be sealed in place. All of these homeowners now have deed notices, and their property values are greatly diminished. Next slide. So in 2017, the State of New Jersey Commission of Investigations published a report, Dirty Dirt, the corrupt recycling of contaminated soil and debris. And in this report, they recommended to the legislature that this material be highly regulated. That is, the recycled soil and fill material be regulated more than it is now because of some of the issues that I showed you in the previous slides. Next slide. So we are inundated with homeowners calling us about problems with fill they've received and after answering some social media free fill advertisements. And free fill is not free. If you notice the picture on the left, that's a construction boot. Just south of that, just on the bottom of that, is a piece of 6-inch rebar. You notice the grass isn't growing very well. This was the backyard where the homeowner had a swing set that was no longer usable because he was afraid his kids would cut themselves on all the construction and demolition debris mixed in with the fill. And on the right, you see the actual social media posts back and forth. I'm not going to read them all. But on the bottom, you can see, you gave us bad dirt and we have to pay to get it removed. I'm reporting you everywhere. We have well over 100 of these cases and they're growing exponentially. Next slide. So in September of 2017, the definition of solid waste was changed to incorporate the site remediation standards. And back then they were known as the residential and non-residential direct contact soil remediation standards. There are a handful, I believe it was 8 standards, that the non-residential setting was actually more stringent than a residential setting. So it made for some confusion. So the definition has the statement, whichever is more stringent. Next slide. In May of 2021, we rectified that issue, and now all residential standards are the most stringent standards with regard to the ingestion, dermal, and ingestion inhalation pathways. So in May of 2021, the site remediation program through NIDEC 726D changed the remediation standards to be exposure pathway specific. So they came up with the ingestion dermal or inhalation or migration to groundwater pathways. So the definition of solid waste is chemically triggered if there's an exceedance of the residential ingestion dermal or residential inhalation soil remediation standards. The exceedance of the migration to groundwater standard alone does not trigger the definition of solid waste. So there is some concern with those looking at this for the first time, wondering how we can rectify a situation where we have fill going throughout the state that fails the groundwater migration to groundwater pathway standard. And when we looked at all of the data, particularly with the type of fill that's reworked often and doesn't have volatile organics in it very often, we find that the migration to groundwater pathway standard is easily surpassed, as consultants commonly do, with modeling or specific leachate tests. Because the groundwater standard, the migration to groundwater standard, is based on the assumption that the contamination is sitting right in the groundwater. And of course, we know that we have some depth between the surface and the groundwater. So consultants can very easily use a site-specific groundwater standard, migration to groundwater standard, that is. So because of that, we find that in these LSRP cases, through the ARCS process, that the triggering event is not often the migration to groundwater standard unless you're dealing with a volatile organic compound. And again, with this construction and demolition debris mixed in with fill, highly reworked, we very rarely see volatile organics. So we are comfortable then in allowing the definition of solid waste to rest upon the ingestion dermal or inhalation to migration to inhalation standards. And we find that the inhalation standard very rarely triggers the definition of solid waste as well, for that same reason that the volatile organics are rarely there. So 99.9% out of 100, we will find that the ingestion dermal, the residential ingestion dermal standard, will be the triggering event of what is considered a solid waste or not. So you see at the bottom of your slide the definition that we are proposing in these regulations for materials that meet the residential ingestion dermal standard or residential inhalation standard as a new term. And that term is called non-restricted soil and fill recyclable materials. NRSFRM is the acronym. Non-restricted soil and fill recyclable materials. Those materials will meet the residential ingestion dermal, residential inhalation, soil remediation standards in NIJAC 726D. Next slide. So why are we concerned with construction and demolition debris? We've done numerous sampling of these type of materials, and inevitably we find a very consistent footprint. For example, metals, we see lead, arsenic, cadmium, vanadium, antimony, cobalt, mercury. We find them in pigments, drying agents, fungicides, electronic switches, residue from oils or combustion of fossil fuels. And in concrete, because you can manufacture concrete with fly ash, which is high in metals. Sheet metal grindings or entrained historical fill. There's also a policy for hexavalent chromium. It's not a standard, but we look at hexavalent chromium, anything over 20 parts per million, as being a concern. So if you're running a total chromium test and you're over 20 ppm, you should speciate it. That means you should see which part of that total is hexavalent. We also find polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. The triggering ones that are most common are benzoate pyrene and dibenz-AH anthracene. And those are typically from asphalt or concrete binders. We find PCBs commonly in caulking or machine or transformer oils. And we find pesticides from the various applications that commercial facility applicators do over the years when they spray a building. And so you find it around the concrete foundations or within entrained soils. Next slide, please. So on your left, you see some unprocessed Class B material, which contains some asphalt, concrete, ceramic, brick, block. And on the right, you see some screen soils. And we know from our inspections that we don't always get the amount of overs that one would expect when you're screening construction and demolition debris. It's very expensive to dispose of overs because they go to a landfill. So what's a common practice is that these overs are screened and rescreened and rescreened until you get as much of the grains of soil out. So what do you do with those soils? Well, the appropriate thing to do may be to test them and to figure out if they have some of those contaminants from that construction and demolition debris. But what we found is that facilities are often mixing it with imported soils and contaminating that load, playing sort of a Russian roulette, hoping that they dilute it enough. Next slide. So if we were to incorporate analytical testing, we know there'd be an economic impact. The hope that is, if this is done, that it's spread across the industry so it's an even playing field. So on this table, you see analytical frequencies anywhere ranging from 20 to 1,000 cubic yards. Now, in consideration is envisioning Class B facilities that sell soils, that they probably would have two types. Some mildly contaminated, which could be reused perhaps as road base material, parking lot base, building foundation base, and others that would be non-restricted soil and fill recycled materials that met the definition so that they didn't trigger the definition of solid waste. So you would have your quote-unquote clean or non-restricted soils in one bin and your mildly contaminated soils in another, just to make it simple. Of course, there could be multiple bins. So whether or not you are testing at a high frequency or at a lower frequency, I think the department is considering looking at those reuse facilities for the mildly contaminated soils when we know that it's at, let's say, a road base where there's less concern with contaminants in a road base than there are if that soil is going to a landscaper who's selling it to a child care facility or a residential home. So we would expect to have a higher frequency of analysis at the quote-unquote clean soils than the mildly contaminated soils. But that's one thought process which we're engaging your input to see if that's actually what we'd like to do. So here we are, after checking with several different labs, we came up with an average cost of about $523 per analysis if you did the target compound list / target analyte list analytes. We're not looking at extractable petroleum hydrocarbons because there's no standard of EPH that triggers the definition of solid waste. And frankly, that particular analyte was meant to earmark what type of petroleum was discharged. We're not looking at tentatively identified compounds because those compounds are estimates and those values are estimates, and we don't have any standards in the definition of solid waste triggered to TICs, TICs, or tentatively identified compounds. So we thought that if we are truly reworking this fill so much, perhaps it would be appropriate to screen it with a properly calibrated photoionization detector. If you're using appropriate soil gas techniques, what we commonly do is place soils in a jar, shake it up, cover the lid with some tin foil, shake it up, pierce the PID tip in and see what the headspace reading is. If we're not getting a significant reading on VOs, we feel comfortable in leaving them out and perhaps doing a few just to check our instrument. So we looked at this cost. How can we reduce it? So we could, if you look at the next slide, take it from 523, next slide please, to 446 if we were able to eliminate the volatile organic analysis. Again, the analytical frequency we're contemplating thinking more frequent with soils that go to a sensitive receptor, less frequent with soils that are going for beneficial reuse. And there are some ranges there. So it could be anywhere in this slide from $22 a yard to 45 cents a yard, depending upon the frequency of analysis. Next slide. Now I'd like to turn it over to Dan Murray.
All right, thank you very much, Tom, for giving us the history of the law and the background why it was promulgated. So, considering that dirt is being transported and sold all throughout the state, you might ask yourself, is it safe for me to use? Well, one of the main issues with this is that there are limited requirements for the sampling and analysis of soil, and that there is an inconsistency in the soil and fill amendments, wherein entities that handle petroleum-contaminated soils do not have to secure licensure by virtue of the fact that these soils are defined as a Class B recycled material. The department wants to address this issue. It's considering revisions to the recycling rules that would consider all non-hazardous soils as Class B recyclable material, and by extension, develop a regulatory structure for the handling of the material at authorized Class B facilities. Next slide, please. So here you can see is the current definition of Class B materials. And what the department is considering is to alter number 5 on the list that states source separated petroleum contaminated soils to include all non-hazardous soils. Next slide, please. So here on this slide and the next couple slides, there's some considerations we want to keep in the back of your minds. These are intended to introduce some of our discussion topics and introduce some of our poll questions that will further expand on these considerations. So the first consideration we have here is the management of soil at Class B facilities, the methods and challenges that facilities might face in segregating and homogenizing soil and fill products of different quantities to be sold. We also need to consider appropriate end use for segregated and homogenized soils. Next slide. Our next area of consideration is the quality of soils handled by Class B facilities. The department would like soils produced and distributed by Class B facilities to meet a quality of standards to make it safe and appropriate for the public to use. We want to know your experience and consideration on what the quality of standards should be. Next slide. A third consideration we have is how a potential rule revision on the classification and handling of soil would impact the existing markets. For example, how would new sampling and testing requirements affect the operation of your Class B facility? And currently, how does the purchasing of soil and fill from a Class B facility compare to purchasing a comparable fill product from a quarry? Next slide. So here we begin the poll question section of this presentation that we would like you guys to answer. As a reminder, as I introduce each poll question, there will be a link in the chat for you to click on and go to. You will be able to select one of the options on the screen. If you wish to select option D for other, there will be another section for you to type in your response. After I state each question, we will be given 1 minute, as you can see on the timer on the screen, for everyone to submit their responses, and then we will have some time for discussion afterwards. First question we have here is for the management of soil. To ensure the confidence in the data generated by the sampling and analysis of soil and fill recyclable materials that have been processed at a Class B facility, please indicate which of the following operational issues could be a challenge. All right, a minute has come up. These are your responses to question number 1, and now I will give the floor to Karen Clue, who, if any of you have any comments, please use the raise your hand function. Karen will call on you, and we can discuss if you would like.
Give you a moment to take a look at how everybody responded, and if anybody has follow-up questions or wants to make comments on this result pie chart, please use the raise your hand function. Thank you. Okay, I do not see any questions or comments. Tyrone, do you want to? Oh, I'm sorry. I do see one. Michelle?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Good afternoon. So I just want to make a comment that it's difficult to see the presentation as you have it defined here. And I would just want to make a comment with regard to some of the Class B recycling facilities that are currently permitted to accept petroleum contaminated soil have been stringently regulated with regard to only being able to accept petroleum contaminated soil for the most part. I think there's definitely, in my opinion, based on what I've heard so far, there potentially could be a disconnect. And I would ask the department to make sure that you talk with the regulated community if, in addition to this time period, if that does in fact happen, because those of us that are regulated for petroleum contaminated soil could potentially help you see that there could be issues with just haphazardly or just generally allowing all Class Bs to accept soil that may contain contaminants. And if you could increase that in size, I don't know if other people are having difficulty seeing it, but for some reason on my screen, I just can't see it. So thank you.
Excuse me, Michelle. I just increased the size. And also, if you click on the screen, hit the control button and scroll with your mouse, that'll also make your picture larger too.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? Questions or comments? All right, Tyrone, would you like to display the others? Okay, the department will take the other, we'll take all the answers under consideration and follow up as necessary will be pursued. I have a couple of more questions. David Morris, you have the floor.
Hey, good afternoon. Thank you very much for doing this. This is just a great thing to be able to participate in this. I put in a question right at the cusp of the minute. My issue is really about the representativity of the sampling results that I end up managing or dealing with, about whether they're truly representative based upon sometimes, the party sampling it, or even stepping over some items where we've had chemically acceptable material, but which has been physically objectionable, things like that. So I think that, getting truly accurate representative samples is always a challenge.
Thank you. Okay. David and Michelle, please lower your hand. Tom?
Yeah, thanks, Karen. I just want to respond to the other comment. The timing for testing is a large consideration. So if this actually is done, what could happen is sort of an assembly line approach. So the way I could see it working would be that you would have multiple bins of certain types of fill. And once a bin was filled, let's say it's filled with mildly contaminated soil, you would have your homogenization done, your sampling done, your lab analysis done for that bin. You couldn't add any more material to it. So you would have to have another bin that you could be filling up while that material was being marketed off-site. And you would have to empty that tested bin completely before you could fill it again. But that way you keep the process moving. You don't stop processing your material as you're selling it off. So it's not like you would be waiting for a long time for your lab analysis, because you'd always be before you could process anymore, because you'd always have another empty bin that you could be processing into. I know that's not ideal, but I thought it just was worth some clarification.
Thank you, Tom. We have a response from Mike Logan.
Yes, hello. Yeah, I wrote in that comment because we work with a number of facilities that, process in that batch processing scenario, which you're going through. And, it does still take a couple of weeks to get the laboratory analysis. If there's any problems with the laboratory analysis, to turn around in those type of issues, they get hung up in the processing. And where we have probably more of an issue, it depends on the facility, obviously, but there's a number of facilities that are smaller and may not have that kind of residence time, physical space at their locations to be able to do that. It does present a problem in some of these smaller Class B facilities.
Understood. Thank you.
Okay, I think we should move on to the next poll question, Dan.
Yes. Yeah, we have a good amount of poll questions to get through today. All right. So our second poll question we have here, should Class B recycling approvals have a condition that specifies required sampling and analytical protocols for incoming soil? Once again, the minute timer has started, and the link has been provided in the chat. Okay, the minute has come up. The results are displayed on the screen with the pie graph. And once again, if you have a comment to make, please raise your hand and Karen Clue will call on you.
Robert Kane, you have the floor.
Hi. Thank you. Yeah, I guess the majority, and thank you again for doing this and getting our input as the people who deal with this. Obviously, number one, that most people seem to think that prescriptive, sampling beforehand is required. And we have a facility in New York, we do the same thing. One of the big things or challenges is always making sure we don't accept hazardous waste. So you could even, our big one even in New Jersey is, the lead. You get the lead results, but we look at the totals and then we have them do corresponding TCLP, make sure we don't have hazardous lead coming in. So that's always a consideration.
Thank you. Anybody else? Any questions or comments on the graph? Tyrone, would you display any other answers? Doesn't look like we had any other. Oh yes, there's a couple there. Keith Prince, would you like to speak?
Yes. Yeah, my answer was yes, but as regards to our facility, we only accept soils that have previously been tested and deemed clean per residential standards. So not having that creates a huge problem for us. We would not want it to land here even mildly contaminated. So we believe that yes, there should be a prescribed protocol for testing prior to arrival at the receiving facility.
Thank you.
And if they lay out a prescription and say you have to do this, 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 and this, then that's what we have to require.
Cost. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's at the customer's cost. Sure.
Great. If we have no other questions or comments, we can move on to the next poll question.
All right, the third question we have here. Should Class B recycling approvals have a condition that specifies the sampling and analytical protocol for outgoing recyclable materials that have been processed at a Class B facility?
Okay, here is the responses. Everyone's attempting to make them as big as possible.
I believe the lighter blue is option A and darker blue is option other. Yes.
Yep, that's right, Dan.
Give you a moment to digest that and ask any questions or make any comments on the graph displaying the responses to this question. Mr. Prince?
Yes. I don't know how you could answer anything other than A. A facility's really sticking their neck out if there isn't some prescriptive testing requirements, etc., to assure that, let me put it this way, who knows what you're accepting? Once it's on your ground, once it's landed here, it's too late, in my opinion. So, I think yes is really the only answer. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Seeing no one, Tyrone, can you display the other responses, please? David Morris, you have a question or a comment?
Yeah, thank you. I just think that, while I think conceptually I agree with the idea of testing into the facility and doing some form of testing as they depart, I think this is fraught with a lot of jeopardy regarding implementability. If you get loads that do contaminate a batch, kind of like the halogen mixing in the hazardous waste rules, these facilities could suddenly be faced with many hundreds or more yards of material that is supposedly clean, which is not, or it's not maybe conforming to their performance requirements. And they're going to have to, they will get creative on what they do about where it will be sent, or trying to find markets where the restriction on its end use isn't so problematic. But the idea of getting bad testing on batches or barrows of material is going to be a challenge, I think.
Thank you. Robert Kane?
I'm sorry, I just have a quick question for clarification. Is this conversation just about contaminated, sort of merging petroleum contaminated with contaminated, or is it also just to regulate clean fill in a Class B?
This is for all fill materials.
All fill materials. I would assume that if you're doing contaminated or petroleum contaminated, you need some sort of avenue to test it. But if you're managing soils on the clean side, technically it's not a solid waste. So then technically, if you have your A901, I'm assuming that you don't really need a Class B to manage clean soil. Unless that's what the department's looking to move all soils through a Class B.
That is a consideration.
Thanks, Tom.
Anybody else? See any other responses? We can move on to the next poll question.
Okay. One quick comment, Tyrone. The PowerPoint is not taking up the full screen. Bear with us 1 minute, everybody.
In the meantime, Karen, we have a request in the chat if we could please give the total responses per question.
Hmm. I'm not sure we can see exactly how many answered A, how many answered B. We can see relative amounts in the pie chart. That is a question for Tyrone.
I could show you. It's going to be at the bottom, but it's going to be a lot of movement. But I'll try.
Thank you.
All right, moving on to question number 4. To ensure that the products being distributed by Class B facilities are appropriate for their customers' use, please note which of the following would facilitate the marketability of soil and fill processed at a Class B recycling center.
It looks like the clock stalled. So we'll give it a few more seconds. There we go.
So I'm seeing 3 answered A, 2 answered B, 4 answered D, and 17 answered C. And now if anybody has a comment or a question to add, please raise your hand. Let Karen call on you.
Doug Urbano?
Yes, I just want to make sure that I'm doing this right. I'm actually just clicking on the letter on the left-hand side to register my answer. Is that correct? Because I don't see anything else on here that showing me where to put my answer in at on the screen.
You click the letter, and then if you scroll down, there's a submit button.
Okay, all right. I didn't see the submit button on there. All right, thank you very much. Also, I want to thank you for the invite to this meeting.
You're welcome. Anybody else? We have a lot of others. I'm not sure we'll be able to see them all, but Tyrone, can you display?
We had someone in the chat if we can explain option A.
All right, let's take a look at these.
Once you bring it up again, I can explain option A. Once we're done with the other, does anybody have any comments on the other? Or?
I see no hands raised, so if you want to talk about A and kind of what we meant by it.
Right, so we know option A is very long. So the theory is that if you are using this construction and demolition debris residual fill material, chances are that the footprint of analytes that we see are very consistent with what we would see in asphalt typically, as far as the types of contaminants. As far as the magnitude, they're typically way less contaminated than what we find in asphalt. So the logic is that if you're going to be pouring asphalt on top of road base and the asphalt contains thousands of parts per million of PAHs when your road base only contains a few parts per million of PAHs, why not let that happen? So that's basically the 75 percentile contaminant concentration phrase there mimics the fill material guidance document that SRP put out in October of 2021. If there were other contaminants that you don't find in asphalt, like PCBs, that would not be able to happen. Okay? However, you could get a beneficial use determination in that instance, or you can get an LSRP to accept it at a site undergoing remediation. And when that happens, just keep in mind that it has to be attributed to the remediation. Some of these sites that are being developed, you might only need 2 foot of fill for the cap and another 8 feet for FEMA considerations. The 2 feet would be considered LSRP approvable, but that 8 feet would not, because that's not part of a remediation. Okay. Hopefully that helped.
Any follow-up questions? Clarification needed? Joel Rogers?
Yeah, hey, how you doing? I just want to make sure I'm understanding exactly what this is saying, because I'm not sure. For some reason, I'm a little confused by this. So is this saying that, like, contaminated fill processed at a Class B recycling facility is question one about then taking that contaminated fill as sort of like a de facto bud for use on a site that's going to be, under asphalt, or maybe I'm just trying to understand exactly what that means.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the realization is that this has been happening all along. It's just that we haven't identified it. We know that, in fact, if you look at the fill material guidance document that SRP put out, they do not presume that fill from a Class B material is acceptable. Okay, because we know that these residual construction and demolition artifacts contain contaminants. So we're kind of like taking our head out of the sand and recognizing that fill from a Class B can be mildly contaminated very often. What can you do about it? We want to try to get out to the public that mildly contaminated fill is not a bad thing. It's very suitable for certain uses. And we just need to get over that stigma, that it's plutonium when it's very usable.
Okay. And then for B, the idea is that you could take that fill on the outbound from a Class B that's contaminated for import where above onto an area of concern for a site that's undergoing remediation as like a cap or leveling in the same way as alternative fill, or am I misunderstanding that?
Yes, if the licensed site remediation professional who's retained through the ARCS process accepts it, then that would be an acceptable remedy, only to the extent that you need that fill to remediate that site. So you can't just start piling on top of what you need. That would not be acceptable. What you do need, let's say you only need a 2-foot cap, that 2 feet of cap, if the LSRP accepts it, he's retained per the ARCS process, then that's acceptable.
Okay. So sort of in place of alternative fill in a way, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it would be up to the LSRP's discretion, because it's his responsibility to make the call whether that fill can be used appropriately at certain sites. And then he would apply the like-on-like and 75th percentile. So again, it's just another use of mildly contaminated soil, Class B.
Okay, thank you.
Robert Kane?
Hi, sorry again. I had a question for Tom, because Tom, you were saying that Class B facilities that generate soil. I thought Class B facilities right now that can accept soil were only petroleum contaminated soil. And there's only like 6 or something in the state.
There's 5 of them in the state.
Five.
But in practice, we did a survey in 2020, and let me see, I got the results here. It was 84% of the Class Bs accepted concrete, brick, block, and asphalt. 98% accept or generate soils. So what we've been doing is requiring that anybody that's managing soils at a Class B incorporates that process in their site plan. That is the only requirement currently existing. If rules are promulgated that require integration of soils as a Class B material, we'll have to write a set of regulations to address that.
I mean, because I mean, obviously, you know who we are, P Park, and we obviously take soil for our quarry reclamation, but we also have a Class B for just concrete, brick, rock, and asphalt. But again, they're two separate entities. So I guess at some point, if we were looking at modifying a Class B, I thought it'd be more for a contaminated or petroleum contaminated basis, not for everything. So I guess it's that mine reclamation component too would be, or is that all going to be part of a Class B or just for the soil that's going out?
Well, again, we don't have answers for you today. We have questions for you.
No, I'm throwing them out to you too. So
right. So anything that makes logical sense, we're considering. So you know, we'll have more discussions on that in parts that, you know, how it ends up, I don't know. I honestly don't know.
I appreciate you being candid, but I'm just throwing out food for thought too. So thank you.
No, I appreciate that. That's what this is all about.
Right, we should probably move on to the next poll question.
Yeah, I am seeing a good amount of chat comments though.
Oh, okay. So I'm not monitoring the chat. Again, just a reminder, for purposes of discussion, we're asking that you use your raise the hand function in order to make comments and questions. That will clear the chat out for use for the poll questions. So again, I encourage you to use the raise your hand function.
Okay, we can move on to the question 5 now. So now we have a few questions regarding the analyticals. If we are to consider that soils being managed by Class Bs need to be tested. So question here we got, should Class B facilities that do not import asphalt, concrete, brick, block, ceramic, or painted wood be exempted from any sampling and analysis requirements for incoming or outgoing soil or fill?
Okay. Tyrone, can you show us the numbers associated with each of those?
So here I see that the majority of you, about 21, selected option C, six selected option B, 1 selected option A, and 2 wrote in another.
Any questions or comments on the graph? John Danho?
Yes, this question is going to go back on from previous meetings, and I think it's been voiced a little bit today. Is it being considered that all dirt moving in the state will have to move through Class B facilities?
So that's an interesting question. We recognize that we couldn't possibly regulate every grain of dirt being moved in the state. So in the frequently asked questions that we put out last October, answers to frequently asked questions, we established some proposed de minimis exemptions. So if you are moving soil in a truck or trailer that has a capacity of 15 cubic yards or less, you would not be subject to the dirty dirt law. If you generate less than 15 cubic yards a day in any day in the year, you'd be exempt. If you have a facility where you process materials and the aggregate of your soil and fill is less than 100 cubic yards, you would be exempted. And finally, and we only have a few people have done this, if you can certify that you only ever deal with non-restricted soil and fill recyclable materials, you would be exempted from the law. I believe we have like 53 people that have done that certifications. Some that frankly raised eyebrows. We were wondering how they could possibly make that certification, because at any time that you are moving material that triggers the definition of solid waste, that certification is invalidated. So you have to be very careful if you do that certification.
Because I guess the caution that I would bring up in that piece is a lot of dirt right now gets moved from one development to another. And you're not talking about a couple truckloads. You're talking about a couple thousand yards, tens of thousands of yards. So to try to run that physically through a Class B facility would get extremely expensive, which everybody then ends up bearing the cost of that. And it's probably not practical or even feasible in the real world to have a facility handle 20,000 yards coming off a job that could just go straight to another site. So how would that be handled? Do we end up putting Class B facilities as brokers in between the two?
Right.
And that touches on this question a little bit too, on what would need to be tested, what doesn't need to be tested.
Right. So I don't recall discussions focus on requiring that soils go to a Class B. I believe, and somebody on the panel can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that's an option that you can go to a Class B if you want to avoid the dirty dirt law. Now, if you don't want to go to a Class B, I don't believe we're forcing you to go to a Class B in any of our proposed rules to date. But of course, everything's on the table. But I don't know if anybody else wants to weigh in on that.
The only thing I'll add to that is some of the later slides we're going to be talking about changes to possible changes to one of our exemptions, and then possibly a new exemption. So this could be an alternative to taking material to solely Class Bs.
Right.
I think it would be wise to investigate an exemption at some testing frequency that would allow material to move just from point A, project A, to project B, not stuff that would already be classified as solid waste, but it could just be dirt that's excavated, no signs of man-made contaminants in it. You run your chem tests, and then you proceed to move it to another site. Otherwise, it's going to become very cumbersome to try to move everything through a Class B facility, maybe even not physically, but are we setting them up as a new LSRP that has to go through all the paperwork in order to move stuff around the state?
No, I mean, you just spurred a thought from our frequently asked questions. The current response to how you're going to tell if soils meet the QA/QC that you need to meet in order to move them. The current thought is that that would be up to each generator, so that there would be no prescriptive sampling or analysis outside of a Class B.
Mike Pastry, do you have something to add?
Yeah. How are you, everybody? My name is Mike Hastry. I'm actually the director of the enforcement program here at DEP. Trying to, kind of circle back to the bigger picture here of what we're all trying to do. And actually how this relates to the soil and fill amendments for the 901 program. So the soil and fill amendments were extremely encompassing. And they required anybody dealing with soils and fill materials, whether you're selling it, you're retailing it, you're brokering it, you're transporting it, you're processing it, whatever you're doing with soil, you would need an A901 license. There were a few caveats or a few off-ramps to that legislation. One was notably if you're dealing with virgin quarry materials, trap rock, clay, sand, that type of material, you don't need the 901. And that's if you're exclusively dealing with those materials. One of the other off-ramps was that if you exclusively deal with Class B materials and you take material and send it to a Class B. Right now, so if you're taking concrete, you're taking brick block, you're taking it to a Class B material. Yeah, as a generator, I don't need it. As a transporter, I don't need it. I don't need the 901 license. The Class B facility doesn't need the A901 license. The key to this, though, is that soil is not a Class B material. It's only a Class B material for the petroleum contaminated soil Class B facilities. So that created a bit of an inconsistency for us. So we have this, if you have petroleum contaminated soils, it's a Class B material, and those entities, if that's all they're handling, would not need to be licensed. When we looked at that, it seemed it could be a little unfair. For the Class B facilities that we know have soil, because right now we don't regulate soil as a Class B material. It's regulated under the licensing rules. So right now, every single Class B facility and or other facilities dealing with soil, which could be a Class C facility, which is using soil to amend their compost materials, the soil blenders who take soil and blend it with biosolids coming off of the treatment plants, all of those folks all need a 901 unless we bring in the rest of the soil universe, not just petroleum contaminated soil, but the rest of the soils. Could be mildly contaminated, can be just regular soil. If we bring all the soils into the universe, then that's an off-ramp for all of the folks. We get the benefit of having some degree of control over that segment of the universe and these materials. And that's kind of the thought process behind what we're looking to do here. We wanted to try to even out the playing field and make this available to everybody, and actually kind of garner some control over the quality and the QA, the QC aspect of the soils that are going all over the place.
And I think that's what I think
I'm
that's
sorry,
what
go ahead.
a good number of us are trying to figure out is every garden center in the state of New Jersey that has a couple loads to a couple hundred yards of topsoil, are they going to fall underneath this? Every soil supplier who's only moving material that wouldn't be at a Class B facility that isn't known to have any contaminants in it, no petroleum or anything else, does everybody fall in there? The contractor, two contractors say, hey, you got extra dirt, I need dirt, it's 5,000 yards. Are they going to
Well,
fall underneath this? That's
yeah,
what everybody, I think, trying to find out.
legislatively, everybody falls under it right now. What we're trying to do is parse out where we think we can provide, where we think we really need some control and oversight, and where we believe that, is from a volume perspective, we don't have to worry about it so much, or some other consideration that we don't have to worry about it so much. The reality, though, is that if the material is contaminated, if it meets the definition of a solid waste, whether you're, a Home Depot with a few bags of soil or you're anybody else, I'm a landscaper, I'm a pool guy. If the material is contaminated and it's a solid waste, it's a solid waste. Nothing is really going to save you. Even having the 901 license does not save you there. You have a license, but to handle solid waste is a whole other regulatory structure. So, but what we're trying to do is figure out how we can, not basically how to put in the controls where we need the controls, but to also provide the regulatory flexibility so that the legislation is not as encompassing as it, on plain value. When you read it on plain value, it's extremely encompassing. So by policy already we have, and policy has to be put into rule, but by policy, what Tom had mentioned, we had cut out a few, potentially have cutouts for small volumes. Still, if they're handling waste materials, it doesn't matter. No volume is going to matter. But so we have that. The other out that we were looking at was for the Class B facilities, if we make the rest of the soil universe a Class B facility, that could get a whole lot of folks out of the licensing requirements. So that's kind of where we're leaning. I don't know if I explained that well enough to try to give you the background as to where we are on this.
Thanks, Mike. I think we probably should move on. I have a couple of people that still have their hands up. So if you could please record your questions, and then we'll come back to them during the Q&A part of the program. I just don't want to fall too far behind on the poll questions. Thank you. Next question, please, Tyrone.
All right. Yeah, what Karen just said, at the end of this, we will have a bigger open discussion portion for anyone that did not get addressed during this. So moving on to question number 6. What parameters should be used to analyze soil and fill materials that are processed at a Class B facility?
So as you can see, a little small, we have quite a few other responses, but the majority answered A. Do we have any questions or comments on this graph? Bill Silverstein. Mr. Silverstein, would you like to make a comment? Or
Yes, actually, well, I had a comment really on the last one, but I think there were a few parts to it. One is just the idea of clean fill, material that actually meets the direct contact numbers that we talked about earlier. The whole question about whether that should be or is included legislatively. I know Mike Hastry just said the starting point is that it is. I think there's still a lot of confusion about that, both from the standpoint of where does that authority come from, but also even just the definition in the A901 where it talks about soil and fill, which would otherwise be a solid waste, and depending on how you pause at the commas in that sentence, you could read it that soil, which would not otherwise be a solid waste, is not regulated. So I think there's still a big question whether clean fill is in or out of the entire process. But if it's in, I think we all need to understand that. And I think then one of the issues I would say is that it should be easier. Or let me say this first. I like the idea of the Class B off-ramp for materials other than petroleum. Like the concept that you're talking about here, I think makes sense. I think it makes it easier for people with small quantities, to take their lightly contaminated soil, to a known facility and just be done with the process. But I also think that when we talked about what should be tested on the way in, what should be tested on the way out, I do think you have to make sure there's not a disincentive to taking material there, because we also talked about the fact that, material that's believed to be clean, like from a residential property that's being moved somewhere, currently doesn't require any testing. If we say that taking it to a Class B facility automatically requires you have to test it on the way in, then there's a disincentive to take it there. So this maybe adds to answers I didn't give to prior questions, but there could be some benefit to make it easy to take material from a residential property into a Class B facility without testing, but make it difficult to go from a Class B facility to a residential property that should require testing. So that you're not imposing additional costs on all those small loads of stuff that's probably clean. If we'd like it to just get into a Class B where it's in the system and controlled, we should not create disincentives to that. But that was what I was trying to get to.
David Morris?
Thank you. Obviously, Mr. Hastry, you do raise some good points. I mean, I perceive these soil and fill recycling materials rules are akin, or should be, like TSCA being a gap filling or a backfilling statute against RCRA. From our point of view, regulation should not be duplicitous, based upon the chemistry, underlying hazardous characteristics, ingredients, whatever, the current programs exist. And as Mr. Silverstein was saying, I mean, the regulation of everything is a little problematical. Look, exemptions are necessary, like the solid waste rules. A de minimis quantity exemption situation is good, but the guidelines are neither perfect nor optimal. Possibly larger volume processes would get more scrutiny. The rules patently originated from significant quantities in individual locations. So the rules could focus, I mean, how does a rule focus on higher frequency vectors? I'm unsure to how to address the garden center scenario. Innumerate small loads are moving. People are often untidy with their discipline of materials management, but the existing rule modifications we're talking about here due to the soil and fill recyclable material rulemaking is a little disconcerting. Like, you have our attention. The pending modifications to the Class B recycling center universe are intriguing.
Thank you, Mr. Morris. Tyrone, can you display the others? Thank you. Mr. Morris, do you have another comment, or is your hand just raised from last time?
My apologies.
No problem. You know, we haven't been doing this, but since I am announcing your name, you haven't been introducing yourself, but it would be helpful to understand who you represent. So before answering your question, before asking your question or making your comment, if you could provide the audience with the company or organization that you are part of. Thank you. Any other questions, comments on this? I think we can move on to the next poll question. Tyrone? Thank you.
Okay, question number 7. For end uses that are specifically residential or childcare facilities, assuming some sampling and analysis of outgoing soil and fill material that has been processed at a Class B will be required, what should the analytical frequency be to confirm that the soil and fill material meets the definition of non-restricted soil and fill recyclable materials?
Thank you, Tyrone. Any comments or questions on the results of this poll question? John Janho?
Yeah, I think it would only make sense if you're going to take material from a Class B facility that's allowed to take in contaminated dirt. It would only make sense to hold them to at least the same standards as remediation sites that are being remediated that aren't going to be residential or childcare facilities. Something less than that just seems like it wouldn't be taking the necessary care, considering where the material is coming from and where it's going.
Robert Kane?
Hi, again, Bob Keane from P-Park. I think it also depends on, the process that's happening at each facility. Tom kind of explained before if somebody's bulking this and bulking that, mixing this and mixing that for little jobs here and there, if you've got one process that's producing a common output, then I think it should be specific in the Class B application.
Thank you. Tom?
Yeah, Robert just stole my thunder there. I think we're looking at facilities that don't know what the projects are until they get a customer to come in and want to buy it. So there's no way to follow the SRP guidance document if you don't know what the volume your customer is that they want.
Thank you. Tyrone, can you display the other responses, please? Mr. Kane, do you have another question? Tom?
No, sorry.
And Mr. Jano, do you have a new question or is your hand still up?
Yeah, it was a new question. We're not a Class B facility, so I'm not familiar with this, but are Class B facilities not currently required to document where material goes that leaves their facility?
Tom or Dan?
Are you asking about all material or soil?
I guess both. Could be crushed concrete, millings, or soil.
So yeah, I believe that as part as the monthly annual reports, they do have to give some specific end market locations and whatnot. So yes.
Okay, but not specifics where they're already asking, like, where's this material going to? Because that would allow for the residential or childcare facility applications to know before it goes.
That's right. It's not a specific address. It is currently given.
Okay.
David Morris?
Hello again. Yeah, David Morris. I'm Vice President at Tectonic Engineering. I'm the past president and a trustee of the LSRPA. Regarding this schools and childcare, I think that this is a little problematic. That the childcare clients and universe struggle with remediation in general, especially clean material. I think the idea of allowing or specifically labeling by sentences that they can source material for the outdoor play area construction from a Class B is fraught with jeopardy, and I wouldn't recommend it to my clients.
Thank you for your comment. Any further questions or comments on this topic? Okay, I think we can move on.
One more.
Oh, I just saw Jennifer Selesky.
Hi, good afternoon, and thank you for having this this call. I did want to just make mention that we're a Class B recycling facility that accepts soil at this time, and we choose not to source and market materials to daycare or child or any kind of schools, childcare facilities. We just feel like there's a more appropriate option for recycled materials, and that includes like our concrete aggregate that might test clean for we sell them to SRP sites and provide them to other facilities that have and market specific and market requirements, so that someone else is approving what's coming out of our facility for nice checks and balances. So I just wanted to throw that out there, that I agree with David Morris that it's just not something that we do.
Thank you, Jennifer. All right, next question, Tyrone.
Hey, question 8. For non-residential or non-childcare facility end uses, assuming that some sampling and analysis for outgoing material, soil and fill material that has been processed at a Class B facility will be required, what should the analytical frequency be to document the quality of the soil and fill that may be mildly contaminated?
Thank you, Tyrone.
So is the majority the fill material guidance for SRP sites? That
Yes, option A is the majority.
Any questions or comments on these responses? Robert Lippincott, please state which organization you're with.
Hi, Bob Lippincott with TRC. Just had a comment about questions regarding the frequency of sampling. It raises questions, as far as A901, to my knowledge and reading through the law and the documents associated with it. As far as I can tell, there was no requirement, or there was nothing included there to require sampling or fill quality or identify or address fill quality. It was more of a tracking mechanism. So when you start getting into these areas of sampling and quality issues, you're really starting to overlap with things like the LSRP program and other general waste classification, waste characterization programs that are already in place in many ways. However, there's a more fundamental issue, and that is waste or soils. Any of this material really have aspects of it that have to do with, first of all, a statistical basis for sampling. The word sample comes from statistics, and it means by definition that you can't know the population, you can't know exactly what every molecule is, so you take samples. It's a statistical based concept fundamentally. And to say 500, 300, 1,000, it doesn't seem to make sense to me, because there's no basis. And so I think it's just a challenging thing. I'm not sure how credible it really is to put a number like that on this. The second thing is, looking at the fill guidance, specifically the DEP fill guidance for SRP sites, the way it's addressed in part is by knowing something about where the source of material is from, and that's very important. The qualitative aspects, or the qualitative in the sense of knowing, for instance, the site, whether it was a completely wooded area never developed, or it came from an industrial site. Those kind of things are important to understand as to how much sampling you might need. And even the statistical analysis, just applying a number of samples per cubic yards for a statistical based to meet normal distributions, etc. That doesn't even cover what you get from understanding the background of where materials are coming from. So when you start to apply that to something like a Class B facility where there's material coming from a lot of different sources and combined together, I don't see how you manage that very easily with just trying to pick a number of samples per so many cubic yards.
Thank you. Anybody else?
You're welcome.
Tyrone, would you like to display the other answers? Questions or comments about the other responses? I think we can move on.
All right. Question number 9. Which of the following QA/QC provisions should be required to support analytical data of soil and fill recyclable materials? This is the pie chart for question 9, Tyrone. Oh wait, yes, correct.
Any questions or comments on the pie chart displaying the answers to this question? Looks like we had 2 other responses. Tyrone, can you display those, please? I guess people chose other but did not fill in the blank. Any further questions or discussion on QA, QC? David Morris?
I just wanted to confirm we had 22 responses out of the to that question. 25, right?
Yes.
From 77 participants. That's it. Thank you very
Yes,
much.
I'm showing 77 participants.
Yeah, I would just encourage everyone to respond to these questions because the quality of it would be muchly improved if we had everyone do that, please.
Yes, I echo that sentiment. When we go to actually draft rule text or guidance text, we revisit every one of these poll questions in order to inform the rulemaking process. Sometimes if you have a split decision, sometimes that indicates to us that we need to do more follow-up on the question, but I don't think we can overstate the importance of getting your input. And these poll questions are one avenue by which you can participate. Thank you.
Yeah, I will add though, the 77 participants does include like the 5 of us presenting and a few internal DEP staff. But I think we can move on to question 10 now. Okay, so question 10. To ensure confidence in the data generated by the sampling and analysis of soil and fill recyclable materials that have been processed at a Class B facility, please indicate which of the following operational issues could be a challenge. And I think we can give an extra 30 seconds because there's a little longer of options here.
Okay, that's probably about a minute and a half. If you would like to display the graph, Tyrone. Any questions or comments? Robert Lippincott?
Yes, Bob Lippincott, TRC. I just thought it'd be helpful to maybe explain that question just a little bit. It seemed like it was a little ambiguous to me the way it started with saying to instill confidence, and then at the end it said would be a challenge, and I'm not sure what could be a challenge. I'm not sure how to take that. Can you clarify that? I mean, are these understanding a question better makes a difference in the answers to me.
Yeah, I'll give it a shot. So obviously, you're going to have different customers with different end uses picking up fill at Class B materials. So if they have an option of picking up material that's known to be mildly contaminated, should the Class B facility protect perhaps themselves and perhaps their customers by some sort of notice, perhaps on the sales receipt or something of that nature, that informs the buyer that this is restricted use fill. It has to have an appropriate home.
So when you at the end of this one says could be a challenge, do you mean could be
Well,
a way?
I mean, It
an
could be,
option?
I could see it as being a marketing challenge. I mean, landscapers might not want to see such a notice, when they're providing fill. Is that going to impact business? Is the
Okay.
stigma so negative? These kind of things.
Okay, that's the way I understood the question, but I just want to
Yeah.
make sure. Okay, thank you.
Tyrone, could you display the other answers? Any questions or comments on this question or this topic? Okay, I think we can move on.
Okay, so that covers the main Class B discussion. Now we're going to talk about some of our considerations for amendments to our recycling exemptions. So one of our considerations is amending our exemption number 20, which currently encompasses the handling of materials for construction companies or contractors that generate source-separated Class B materials as part of their demolition work. Entities that handle material under Exemption 20 must be the sole end user or end market of the product that is generated. As part of the proposed revision, the department's considering allowing all soils generated by a demolition contractor to be brought back to the construction yard under certain volume restrictions for use on their own construction projects. Next slide, please. So here we have one simple poll question. Should outgoing materials from a contractor's yard under this exemption comply with the sampling and analytical requirements noted for Class B facilities that handle construction and demolition debris and soils?
Tyrone, can you display the graph from the response to the last question? Thanks. Questions, comments?
Could we see the other response?
Any questions or discussion about this topic? Thank you. Mr. Lippincott?
Just curious about the volume. I don't remember the statement that was read before, but is there any kind of volume limitation on this or amount, or is it potentially for any amount in a contractor's yard for any size project? The reason why I ask is that I believe that the white papers and presentations that led to the statute was about large contamination problems due to the organized crime, and now we're talking about small, potentially yards of soils that are completely not on that magnitude whatsoever. It just seems to me like there's a volume issue here.
Yes, there was a volume limitation proposed in a prior stakeholder meeting for exemption 20. We didn't reiterate it here, and I don't remember what that limitation was, but there was a limitation there.
I mean, there should be an understanding, anyone who's handling soil like that, that they should be still obligated for the soil to be clean, and if it turns out it's not, that there might be there might be enforcement provisions, etc., or requirements to compensate or whatever, or fix the problem, make corrective action. But the sampling costs themselves for small volumes of soil like that make it cost prohibitive for some small contractors that are otherwise reputable. So that's my comment.
Thank you. I think we can move on to the next slide, please.
Oh, could you go back one, please? All right, so our last consideration we have for the day is to include a new recycling exemption for soil processors that do not operate a Class B facility. This would mainly include entities that import blending materials to manufacture dirt or topsoil, fill dirt or topsoil. You can go on the next slide. So now we have a few more poll questions relating to this consideration for a new exemption. First question, volume limit. What should the volume limit of such exemption be, considering both processed and unprocessed materials combined?
Sorry, may I just ask, are you talking about, what's the frequency or the time period for this exemption? Otherwise, I don't think you can answer the question.
At any one time.
Thank you.
Tyrone, can you display? Oh, there you go. Questions or comments on this topic or this graph? Keith Prince?
Just a comment. Provided the feedstock or the incoming material to the facility is designated as clean, I don't feel there should be a volume limit.
Anybody else? Can you display the other, please, Tyrone? Doug Urbano?
Yes, Doug Urbano from Landscape Materials. I think that another exemption for facilities, and I'm considering myself as one of them, that do bring in wood waste, leaf compost, and we do handle soils, and we do manufacturing, and we do process. I think that would kind of separate us from the Class B facilities, because I've always classified a Class B facility as somebody that would handle contaminated waste, that would bring it in and do their process or whatever they do to it, and bring it off to certain landfills, and not really get involved with the same kind of industry that I would be in, as far as dealing with residents, and as far as landscapers, supply yards, or like other landscape supply yards that we supply, and things of that nature. You're basically opening up a different market for people in my side of the industry, and I think that this would be very beneficial to determine who's handling contaminated material and who's not handling contaminated materials. The materials that we accept in here, we require that everybody bring analytical data, to the table first before we're willing to accept it, just to make sure that it's clean before it comes in, because now it becomes an issue for me if it's not clean. We basically get our materials tested at least once a year on what we process here, to make sure it's clean before it goes out into the open market, and just to cover our own bases. I mean, I'm not a Class B facility that handles contaminated waste. I'm not interested in that. So I really think that this would be a real good exemption for you to put out there. I think it'd be very beneficial to people like myself.
Thank you. Anybody else? We can move on.
All right, question 13. Should the exemption for such soil processing facilities have a condition that specifies sampling and analytical protocol for outgoing products?
We had a few others. If you want to display those responses, please. Questions or comments on this topic? Okay, I think we can move on then. I'm sorry, John Jenna.
Yeah, I think we're starting to touch on the material that may not have to go to a Class B facility, but it's still hard to delineate. Are we trying to stop dirty dirt from being moved around the state, or are we just focusing on facilities? Because if we keep targeting facilities, what's going to happen is dirt's going to move off a job and they're just going to look to go directly to another job, which just kind of circumnavigates, I think, what's the purpose of what we're doing. So we're not really capturing the big part of the market if we're only targeting the facilities. Class B is already kind of regulated. This is an exemption for other players or potential exemption. But what are we doing about the bulk of dirt that moves around the state? Because most of it is going from site to site.
So I'll take that. So the dirty dirt law is really a misnomer. It really should be called the clean fill law, because you need to register to haul soil fill recyclable materials which meet that they don't exceed the definition of solid waste. We already have regulations in place if you exceed the definition of solid waste. What we don't have are regulations for when you don't exceed the definition of solid waste. You might ask, well, why are we regulating clean fill? The reason is because there are many numerous instances we come across where fill is presented as clean fill, and it certainly is not. And you might not be able to see that visually, but the only way that we would have probable cause to sample that ourselves is if there was some violation of some law. Now, if they are required to get an A901 to haul non-restricted soil and fill recyclable materials, and they didn't get that A901, that is a suspicion that gives us probable cause to check out the clean fill to see if it truly is clean fill. It's basically our foot in the door or the head of the spear.
So wouldn't it be easier to just require dirt when it's going to be moved by the exporting facility to follow some protocol? That way any inspector at any time could stop on the job and say, hey, where's your paperwork? Like if you get pulled over on the road, hey, here's my registration and insurance. It's easy to check it then. Otherwise, when dirt gets moved specifically from one place to another, okay, the hauler maybe has their A901 now, or if it gets called a new thing because everybody that moves dirt has to have it. But we're not really getting the background of what needs to happen when you move the bulk of dirt that moves around the state from site A to site B and it's not going to a facility.
Right. So we're definitely looking at generators as being, having requirements to do this work, to make sure everything's right. Their QA/QC program needs to be in place. So if you have a major developer, he can't just put it off on, well, I've subcontracted it out. That's in their contract to take care of it. We're thinking about having developers being culpable to have the QA/QC program in place, that they are certain that this material is going to an appropriate location.
Jeffrey Day.
Good afternoon. Just touch on that same point as what I had my hand up before. How you doing, Tom?
Hey, Jeff.
Sorry, Karen. Jeff Dye with RCC, also an LSRP. We do quite a bit of sampling on dirt that's being generated on construction sites, moving from that site to the next site, as John is just alluding to. And that's being self-implemented by the site civil and heavy civil contractors to manage their own liability, because they are typically responsible to bring it onto the site for the developer. So we're typically following the fill guidance on that, recommending that. We get asked a lot, not by various folks, as well as there are also local municipal rules where the municipal engineer or other official is looking to review it, or the municipal engineer is reviewing applications or soil that's coming in, and they're typically looking for an LSRP, letter review, sign off on that it's been sampled, and based on the sample results, it's appropriate for that use. Typically, they're looking for it to be clean fill when it's being used, just to as general site fill. So that's happening quite a bit. I'm sure there are bad actors, but the larger and even smaller, and a lot of other contractors are sampling the soil as it moves from site to site.
Thank you, John. Jenho, do you have another comment?
Yeah, just to what Jeff said, the market is, by and large, policing itself, because nobody wants to move material, find out later it was contaminated. Now the donor source gets pulled into a lawsuit, and you don't want to bring material onto your site and find out later that it's getting contaminated. And that's kind of already happening naturally. It's the smaller stuff that isn't going to get to a site that probably contains the majority of the contamination that's getting moved illegally in the state. And I'm just trying to figure out how to cast the net to catch that, as opposed to overregulate everybody else that's already doing it the right way.
Well, we've succeeded in our purpose in getting you to think for us, so thank you very much.
Jennifer Solewski.
Hi. And I just wanted to make a comment too, that the movement of material from site to site, from my experience, I've seen a lot of towns and municipalities implementing the guard your yard rule, that, so they're asking for, certain volumes. That it's not very consistent among the different municipalities, but it is, some of them have smaller volumes. And they are asking for where the material is coming from, the analysis and everything else. I've seen it at my house personally, which I was really excited that they were asking for data, because I wanted to see it. But in other avenues as well, just from what we do at Bayshore, asking for permits, and while we start to find out more about where people want to bring material, we're seeing, even for commercial sites. So it's nice to see that that's, another avenue that is being followed to help manage the movement of materials. That's it.
Okay, I think we can move on.
Okay, question 14. Should there be sampling and analytical testing requirements for outgoing materials under this new consideration exemption?
Questions or comments?
What category is the majority? I can't tell the colors.
So I'm seeing the majority is A with 15. B with nobody picked B, I don't think. C with 1, D with 4, E with 3, F nobody picked, and G other with 2.
David Morris?
Yeah, thank you very much. Well, we're seeing a lot of this being referred back to the technical guidance. The fill guidance has seen some changes over time, and it's being used by the unregulated community in the market, not just the LSRPs at site remediation, sorry, CSSRP sites. You know, I really think that with what's contemplated here, there's going to have to be some coordination and possibly revisions to make the guidance more broad and or add details for it to apply in these situations that we're facing here. I don't think it's simple enough just to say, you know, invoke the guidance by name when there's I don't think that the guidance was contemplated or is actually satisfying what we're talking about here. Thank you.
Thank you. John?
I think the clean fill guidance, especially knowing that it's soon we're gonna be adding PFAS to that guidance, the amount of cost that's going to be generated on materials, especially in smaller quantities, is going to get really expensive really quick for the average homeowner who's looking to buy topsoil, or the average job site that needs a couple loads. I mean, you're talking about 30, 40, 50 plus dollars per cubic yard in testing costs on smaller projects. So that should be weighed pretty heavily. It would be nice to be able to make sure everything's squeaky clean, but it would just bring the market to a halt.
Anybody else? Robert Kane?
Yeah. Hi again. Thank you. I just saw that I was prepping for the call and I saw that there's a new guidance document from May 2nd, 2023 by the DEP. And they actually define the limits for non-restricted soil, and PFAS and the other emerging contaminants were not listed on that. And the way we're interpreting that is it's still for site remediation programs. But I agree that, you know, it will be something that will be very people are going to start looking to I'll get rid of my stuff in another state if they're going to have to do all the emerging contaminant sampling for clean fill.
Thank you. Mike Logan? Mr. Logan, do you have a comment?
Sorry. The mic pickup. I was going to echo the same concerns that here at Compliance Plus we deal with a lot of facilities that are taking materials in from small generators. And while the fill guidance document is prescriptive and has a lot of valuable use from an SRP site, when you talk about smaller amounts of materials that are being moved around the state currently, even that having an exemption under the 33rd law, there's still a number of issues that need to be readdressed to handle the types of soil movements that are not related to SRP sites or not related to this type of typical operation going around before it does get overly costly and very, very difficult to manage. It's going to push materials out of the state.
Thank you. Tyrone, can you display the other responses? Anybody else? I think we can move on.
Okay, we have just a few more poll questions left. So question 15, should unprocessed materials be allowed to be mildly contaminated if the final product meets the definition of non-restricted soil and fill recyclable materials?
Okay, and I'll take Tyrone a moment to display the graph. That was quick. Any questions or comments on this poll question or the results? Bill Silverstein?
Yes, I just had a question. This maybe gets back to what Class B facilities, do now. But I think when we were talking earlier about, just bringing materials into Class B facilities and whether material should be tested on the way in and whether it should be tested on the way out, we didn't kind of ask this same question. Like in the general concept, if a Class B facility, can make and ship a clean material, is it actually okay that some of the material, coming in, is not entirely clean? It would seem like there should be some consistency between, the way a Class B works and this exemption. I'm just not totally sure I understand exactly what the market is for this exemption, but it seems like maybe those two should have the same answer.
Can you display the other? Thank you. Any questions, comments? Okay, let's move on.
Question 16, which of the following QA/QC provisions should be required to support analytical data of soil and fill materials?
Questions, comments? Tyrone, would you like to display the other, please? I think there's only one. Guess I didn't write anything in. Any questions, comments, discussions on this topic? David Morris?
Thank you. Yeah, I'm just unclear about how this quality assurance, quality control, data quality assessment, or data usability evaluation kind of process is going to be affected by this relief regarding the support of the lab data. Considering most of the laboratories we use for this, aren't OQA certified, routinely or modally will get reviews deliverables. No, I'm not sure whether this has such a significant change, or I'm interested to understand the position of how this is perceived to be helping us in this problem. It's not a criticism, just an observation.
Yeah, I'll take that. So inspectors from DEP are required to look at these facilities to make sure that whatever rules are in place are being followed. The department does have a budget to do our own sampling, and we contract with a certified laboratory to do the analysis. So we could, if there is a problem, or just checking to see that there's not a problem, do our own analysis. And we typically will support that with backup QA/QC. If it's explainable why facilities data isn't up to snuff, to me, you need some backup QA/QC to figure out why. So that's really the genesis of that question.
Got it. Thank you.
Tracy Straka?
Yes, hi, Tracy Straka. I'm representing the Environmental Business Council, Commerce and Industry. One comment that I just want to caution everybody about, we're a group of professionals here on the phone, but you're going to be applying this to smaller contractors, people in the general population that don't necessarily have the expertise. So any guidance, requirements, the ability to look at data needs to be explained in a guidance and simplified enough for an average business person, not an environmental professional, to be able to understand what they need to comply with and that they're doing the right thing, because you're asking a small contractor to go hire a dedicated LSRP or a dedicated LS or environmental manager or something is going to be a huge, huge burden. So just as we're developing this program, make sure that it's going to be relatable to the regular business person.
Thank you. Mr. Lippincott?
Yes, actually, following up on Tracy's comment, the just to take a page out of other programs that are probably even more acute regarding exposure in the homeowner testing well requirements. There's no such QA requirement to be included with the lab data, and that's drinking water in people's homes. So I think Tracy makes a good point, because you can use the data and it comes from a certified laboratory. That would be, to me, that would be enough. And to Tom's point, I think right now the way the laboratories are set up, you can always go back and ask for QC on a lab package within a reasonable time frame for nominal cost, if any, to get the kinds of QA you would need for most of that kind of review. I guess I would also add that if needed, so if there was something that was questionable or looked out of line, you could go back and get that. I would just also add that in my 34 going on 35 years of experience doing this here in New Jersey as an LSRP and in this field, it's I find it's extremely rare to reject data. The quality of the laboratory data coming out of the labs is generally such high quality and consistent that not that they're perfect, but within the range of the requirement, what we're talking about here, the data are usable for the data quality objectives. And I come from a lab background as well, so I understand the QC issues in laboratory data. So I just thought I'd share that.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Thank you.
Move on.
All right, we're finally at our last poll question, 17. What parameters should be used to analyze soil and fill materials at a soil processing facility?
Any discussion, questions, comments? You please display the other. Any thoughts on this question or responses? Okay. Next slide, please. Oh, Mr. Lippincott?
Oh, I just thought I'd mention that one of the methods that's typically used, I'm sure most of the people on the call are aware, of sampling for certain contaminants or constituents, and that leads to other sampling of a more detailed analysis depending on the results, and that there might be some wisdom in doing that to slim down some of the requirements. Requiring TCL, TAL lists for everything all the time is not only very expensive, it may not be necessary, because you can screen out some contaminants and maybe do that on some more limited frequency versus others. For instance, put EPH or something on a more common or more routine frequency, and a reduced frequency for some of the others.
Anybody else? Okay, let's proceed to the next slide.
Okay. So I will now pass the floor back to Karen for our discussion portion. Thank you all so much for your responses to the poll questions and our discussion on them. So here for the remaining about 20 minutes, We're going to open the floor again to everybody, elaborate on anything that was shown. And some of you already did this, but let us know if there were any additional poll questions we could have asked the group.
Thanks, Dan. So we want to hear from you all in the limited time we have left. Just please keep in mind that the purpose of this meeting is to discuss possible changes to the Class B and exemption rules. While these possible rule changes are related to the Dirty Dirt law and rules, we appreciate you limiting your questions to focus on possible Class B and exemption rule changes. Again, please raise your hand. When called upon, unmute your mic, turn your camera off, and introduce yourself and your organization. When done, please mute your mic, turn your camera off, and lower your hand. I can open the floor now. Mr. Kane.
Sorry, technical difficulties. Sorry, Bob Keane, P Park, New Jersey. This is from a comment from before that was sort of tabled. I think it was Mike Haster and was talking before. And I think it kind of dovetails back to what Tom was talking about before too. I do love the idea of Class Bs having the ability to add non-petroleum contaminated soil. I'm not so sure I understand enough to say that I think all soil should go through Class Bs. But I think one of the problems that I kind of picked up from what Tom and Mike were saying was that, Tom said that 98% of all Class B facilities manage soil to some degree, but only 5 are technically regulated to handle soil. And Mike was saying that the A901, there's problems because there's no guidance with respect to how do we handle soil as everybody. And as for P-Park, we lose a lot of jobs because people are like, I don't want to do your sampling frequencies. And there's nothing really prescribed in the A901 technical guidance for a sampling. So just kind of throwing that out there.
Thank you. Anybody else? Questions, concerns? Mr. Morris?
Yeah, David Morris, Tectonic in the LSRPA. I would just say that, what we're talking about here about the testing of inbound materials and outbound materials at a facility, is going to create a burden. It is creating a burden if it comes into place. It's an internal cost premium, a de facto task for these facilities that are doing the right thing and being on the radar. From an environmental point of view, we want to encourage the reuse and recycling of material rather than, have people turn to virgin quarry rock products and that scar the landscape and all of that goes with it. There's tension here about the additional costs to be placed on buying material from a Class B. I wouldn't want it to get enhanced such that people automatically go to, kind of that secondary, initial market. Thank you.
Mr. Prince?
Okay. Yeah. Honestly, in future shareholder meetings, I'm assuming there's going to be some more of these, and they are very helpful, and they've answered some questions for us. I'd like to see a little more discussion on facilities that only accept clean soil as a soil recycling facility. I saw a lot about Class B facilities on here, but the mildly contaminated soils don't apply to us. We don't accept those. So maybe a little more focus on us so we know where we stand as opposed to the Class B facilities. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. There was a helicopter flying by.
Sorry. Also, the volume of soils is important to us because, we have the ability to handle larger volumes of soil than probably most of the Class B facilities. So the volumes that would be allowed as well as, the testing requirements for those. Thank you.
Thank you. Michelle Zolzi?
Yes, good afternoon. Thank you again. My name is Michelle Zalisi. I'm the general manager for Pure Soil. We're at the Environmental Division of Earl. We're a Class B recycling facility. We are permitted to take soil, petroleum contaminated soil, as it's stated under the Class B guidance. Once again, thank you for the opportunity. I would recommend that we are engaged and invited to help facilitate this option moving forward. I would respectfully request from the department that those people that are permitted for soil acceptance at our Class Bs have the opportunity to liaise and talk with you. I think we have a lot of experience doing this. You know, we've been operating our facility since 1990, and we've worked with the department collaboratively and very cohesively on lots of levels. And I think there's a little, just to be transparent and thorough, I think that there's a little bit of ambiguity in what this meeting was actually for. I know a lot of stuff came up about the A901. I know that there are a lot of other facilities that are on here that currently aren't accepting material, but may accept clean material as defined by the guidance and also have their own parameters. So I think that should be taken into consideration if you're not cognizant of that. Some of them have county types of permits that have been operating for a really long time, like sand mines and things like that. And so those operations seem to be working well. Understanding that most of the professionals here on the call have been involved with the stakeholder process for a very long time, whether it's alternate fill, the clean fill guidance, as well as the A901 legislation. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention and just get that on the record. I think there are opportunities for us to work together, and obviously we want to, most of us here or all of us here are good actors. And we want to help you prevent, the other actors. What we don't want to do is necessarily create so much ambiguity that you guys are not able to regulate things properly. And I think that because of our experience and working with you for a very long time, I think that there's opportunity for us to have some synergies and collaboration. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. Mr. Prince, do you have another question or comment?
No, I'm sorry. I forgot to lower. Thank you.
No problem. Anybody else? We have a few minutes left. Doug Urbano?
Yes. I just want to go back to my statement that I made earlier as far as separating the Class B from the exemption. I think that you're dealing with two different industries here, so to say, as far as handling soils that are not contaminated versus soils that are contaminated. And I really think it would be very beneficial to separate the two of them in your decision making with this. You're kind of dealing with two different elements here. You're dealing with materials that could be brought in from job sites that were environmentally tested prior to removal off-site, going to a facility that can accept clean material, nothing that's contaminated, for beneficial reuse as far as soil is concerned, to go out into the open market, as far as fill's concerned, going to other job sites, just a whole different array than being obligated with the laws of a Class B. I think you're looking at two different elements here. In Tom's statement earlier, with his slides with contaminated materials that were going to different places, I think this is a way to eliminate this and have more control over it, that the materials are going to specified places that are doing the right things with them and turning around and using them for resale, for residential and commercial uses as well. I think that it's something that you should consider, and thank you for the opportunity for this meeting today.
Thank you. Michelle, do you have another question, comment?
I do actually, so thank you. I just wanted to follow up with regard to how facilities are processing soil currently, and working with the LSRPs and the environmental professionals, do realize that most facilities that are currently processing soil or taking in contaminated soil, for that matter, are not submitting it back out to the open market. So you just can't come in and buy some, processed non-hazardous soil and use it for fill. We do have some other implementations in place, such as beneficial use sites, which are helpful for that. People can bring it to recycling facilities now that use that as cover, and know that working with the LSRPs and the environmental professionals, with regard to when they're overseeing sites or site remediation process, they're very particular on, the material that's coming to them, for them, as they should be. Obviously, the goal is to be protective of human health and the environment. I think that we all see that. So I think that the department should keep that in mind when they're looking about allowing just anyone or any facility, or creating this opportunity for Class Bs to start taking material that doesn't necessarily meet the clean fill as clean fill. And I just wanted to state that for the record. Thank you.
Mr. Kane?
Sorry, one last thing, just for Tom to think about too, is if you're going to make all Class B facilities handle soil, there's also bonding considerations. That might be problematic for some of the smaller people that you're pushing into that program, as opposed to just keeping it in the A901. And the second thing would be the annual reporting. I mean, no offense, but I would hate to have to do that annual report with all the soil going out if you're pushing a lot of soil out. But it's definitely required, but just something else to consider.
Thank you. Mr. Urbano?
If my hand is up, I'm sorry.
Wolf Skasel?
Hello. Hi, Karen. Haven't seen you in years.
It's a long time.
Been a long time. So Wolf Skasel, EnviroCop, and retired DEP, former Assistant Commissioner for Enforcement. It was a great discussion today. The thing I'm wondering about is, you have probably the lion's share of the facilities that are really trying to comply with the law and do everything right. And the thought that popped into my head was, maybe they have some ideas on things that DEP could do to kind of better ferret out the problem facilities. We're kind of using a shotgun approach to target everybody, when really it's a small subset that's the problem. And how does DEP go after that subset that's the problem? So I'd like to maybe see a discussion along that line. Maybe that's a future discussion, or maybe if the time permits, if somebody has some thoughts, a way to maybe have that conversation. So thank you.
Thank you. David Morris?
Thank you. I just wanted to make mention, one, thank you very much for the session. I think these have been very useful. And from our point of view in the association, this has been very much the exception to the rule in the development of rules. We've understood that interim draft rule language is not getting shared with the regulated community or the stakeholders by fiat, which we're not exactly too thrilled about, because I think it eliminates a lot of contribution and participation and efficiency in the process. So thank you for offering this session. The one thing I'll just make mention of is, back in the day, Class B recycled material used to be clean by fiat, by definition. And that was changed partially because some made mischief with that, and that definition was changed so that it wasn't by definition clean fill. The idea of Class B recycling centres now managing, distributing clean fill, clean soils is interesting, because it's not where you would automatically think to go. And I do think that there's some valid practical difficulties, as we've been mentioning, and as the questions are showing, that how to manage this in a way that works. And if the Class B centres aren't the ones, then who will be? So I just wanted to acknowledge the difficulty or the challenge that we're facing here. And as Michelle Zaleski said, and others, really please engage the regulated community, specifically, in whatever way. This series of questions is interesting. It wasn't expecting a pop quiz, today, but I see how it can get a lot of feedback. But there's other things or other ways we could present this, because it was a little bit of a travail to answer the questions this way without context. But definitely, I think you're on the right approach in order to put this out there, because this is, you're going to regulate everything larger than a load moving in a single axle mason dump, and that's going to be the idea. We don't want to have this multiplex of regulations on people. But we understand where you're coming from. But the implementation of it is very significant. So thank you.
Thank you. Michelle?
Yes, I just had one more comment. I wanted to compliment Wolf on his input. I want to say I think many of us in the community that are accepting contaminated soil and are running at Class B kind of echo those same sentiments. So it's all about collaborating with the department and doing what's best moving forward. So thank you.
Thank you. We have 5 more minutes, so I will turn it over to Dana. Thank you for your participation.
Yeah, thanks, Karen. I guess, Tyrone, if you could switch to the next slide. Be great. Good. So, I mean, what a great meeting. And that is in large part to all of you who have participated today. So thank you so very much. I also want to express my appreciation to our presenters, Daniel Murray and Tom Farrell, our facilitator, Karen Clue, our chat moderator, Chelsea Martin, as well as our IT professionals, Tyrone Jordan and Anthony Teal, without which none of this would be possible. This meeting has been incredibly productive. We now have so much more information that'll help us in achieving our goals. Many interesting points were raised or emphasized, from the confidence in the data generated by testing, as well as managing the movement of materials, to the marketability of soil, to sampling for exempt facilities, to ensuring facilities don't accept hazardous waste, cost concerns, and more. All super important concepts to inform the work of our rule writers and the staff that will be drafting the guidance documents. There were, as you all know, some other questions and concepts raised that need further discussion, and we will be reaching out to you. And also, just to let you know, at some point in the not too distant future, a summary of the topics covered at this meeting and all the relevant information, including the PowerPoint with responses to our poll questions, will be made available at the link on your screen. Also, just part of the rulemaking process, following the New Jersey Register publication of the rule proposal, formal comments on the rules may be made by anyone during the announced comment period. And finally, if you have any question that was not addressed, or if you think of additional questions after you leave this meeting, feel free to contact us, direct your questions or thoughts to our recycling facilities box listed on your screen. I just want to thank you all again, each and every one of you, for your participation. It is much appreciated. And I see we have a question. Can you put the link in the chat? We can't open it from the screen. Yeah, we'll also, we can't do that right this second. We will, let's see if we can maybe put the link to the stakeholder work group public meeting. Does anybody have access to that at the moment? Oh, good. Thank you, Dan. All right, that does it. We look forward to speaking to you again soon. Thanks, everyone.